in unique ID, we have a class customer, and a customer is an object that is made up of a name and an ID, and we have a couple of methods here: get name, get ID, and compare customer. Compare customer is the one that we are going to be asked to implement. And what is it going to do? It returns a 0 if the customer is equal to another customer, and it is going to return a positive number if the customer is greater than the other customer, which is an argument coming into the method. And it's going to return a negative value if this customer is less than the other customer. And so now the question is what is equal to mean, what is greater than mean, what is less than mean? And so as we look into the question, we can see here that we have this chart, which is an array of customer objects, and each one consists of a first name and an ID. And the way that this is going to work is if let's assume we're comparing this first object here with this object here. We're going to compare the first letter of the first names using the ASCII chart. Right? And I'm sorry, not the ASCII chart, but we're going to be comparing them using strings compared to method, which uses the ASCII chart. And what it does is it takes the first letter and it subtracts it by the ASCII value of the first letter of the second name. And so since they're both capital A, it would subtract 65 by 65, giving you 0. And so since they are both 0, then we still haven't figured out which one is greater than or which one's less than, or if they are equal. So we move on to the second letter. And here we have lowercase r compared with lowercase a. And on the ASCII chart, lowercase a is valued 97 and lowercase r is 114. So we take 97 minus 114. That produces a negative value. And so since we have a negative value, that is what compared to is going to return, like negative 14 or whatever it is, right? And if compared to iterates through the entire name and it's 0, 0, 0, 0, 0, and we get to the very end, then compared to returns a 0, meaning that both are equal. Right. And so what we're supposed to be doing here is we're comparing the names first, and then if the names are equal, then we are comparing the ID numbers. Right. So the way we're going to write this is, we're going to have our compare customer, and we're going to be taking in another customer. What we're going to do is get the name of the current customer, right, and run compare to. Since get name is a string, we're running the string method compare to with the incoming customer's get name, right? And that's either going to return 0, a negative value, or a positive value. And so what this is saying here is if it's equal to 0, then that means the names are equal. So what we're going to have to do is compare the ID numbers and return the difference between the ID numbers. So that's either going to be positive or negative or 0 if they're equal. Right? And so this algorithm here would return, if both names are equal, then this call to compare to would return 0, diff would be equal to 0, and then we would compare the ID numbers. If they're the same customer, it would return 0, and we would return diff because both the name and the ID numbers are equal. But let's say one of the ID numbers are different. So let's say this returns a 0 because the names are the same. And then we come in here, we compare the ID numbers, but one is greater than the other. So diff becomes either a positive or negative number, and we return that negative or positive number. Let's say the names are different. It's going to come through here, and compare to is going to return either a positive or negative number, depending on which name is further on down on the ASCII chart. Diff is going to be that positive or negative number. This is not true, and we're going to return the positive or negative number. So that's one way to implement the compare customer method using the strings compare to method. And if we look on down, we have part B, which is to implement the prefix merge method. And this prefix merge method takes in 3 arguments. We have list 1, list 2, which are lists of customers, and it takes in a array of called result. Right? The array result is predefined, so its size is predetermined. We don't need to worry about that at all. What we're going to do is we are going to compare the customers in the two lists, and whichever one comes first, we are going to put into result. Okay. So let's take an example. We have this example here. What the merge algorithm is going to do is compare Arthur and Aaron, and since Aaron is first, because alphabetically it's first, right, we have both the capital A, and then it's going to compare the R and the lowercase a. The lowercase a comes first on the ASCII chart, so we're going to stick Aaron into the first element in result. And then what is it going to do? It's going to compare Arthur and Baker. Arthur obviously comes before Baker, so we're going to stick Arthur into the next location. And then we're going to compare Burton and Baker. Baker comes first, so we're going to put Baker in the next one. Burton here, they're both the same, so we're going to put Burton on the third element, or in the third element, but we're only going to compare Burton once, so both of these are going to be taken out of the comparison for the next iteration. And then we're going to compare Burton with the ID of 4944 with Dillard. Burton obviously comes first, so we're going to stick that in the next slot. And then Franz and Dillard. Dillard comes first, so we're going to stick that in the last slot. And that's why we get this final result here, right? And again, result is length is predefined, so we don't need to worry about that. We just iterate through length, and we compare our customer objects, sticking them into the array in order using the compare customer method that we just built. Right? So how would that look in code? Well, we got this prefix merge here. We're taking in list 1, list 2, and result. We have a for loop that's iterating through result, and we have two indices. One we're going to be using for list 1, the other one we're going to be using for list 2. And as we come in, we start out by getting the first element in list 1, the 0 element, putting it into C1, getting the first element in list 2, putting it to C2, and then we're running compare customer. So this is either going to return negative number, positive number, or 0, and it's going to return a negative number if C1 comes first, right? And it's going to return a positive number if C2 comes first, and it's going to return 0 if they are equal. So the first check here is we're checking if C1 is the first element, and if it is, then we're sticking him into the first element in result. We're just taking result sub 0 and making it equal to C1, and then we're going to increment I, which is list 1's index, right? So we inserted the list 1's first value into result, and then we're going to increment the index for the first list, right, list 1. And if the opposite is true, then we are going to stick C2 into the result array, and we're going to increment J. And else means that diff is equal to 0, and if that's true, then we're going to stick C1, or you could put C2 into the result, and then we're incrementing I and J, because of course that means that both of them are equal. So we have Burton and Burton are being compared, they're both equal. We're going to stick Burton into the result array, and then we're going to increment I, and we're going to increment J to the next element. And I think that's about it. Yeah. And so running this would fill result with customers from list 1 and list 2 in order using the compare customer method.